All right, for our next exercise, we're going to pretend to be working with the same merchant that we did in the last exercise, but this time they want to add a confirmation form instead of the um, immediately executing the payment on return from PayPal like we did in the last exercise. So we're going to help them upgrade their integration so that the confirmation form is populated with the PayPal account details, and the payment is executed after clicking the place order button. So we're going to use the checkout/rest-confirm.html file for this integration. So before we start actually helping the merchant with this integration, we're going to test our merchant's payment callback to make sure that it's working properly. So using what we learned in previous sections, how can we execute the merchant's payment callback using Chrome console? Give you a minute to think about it. All right, so let's just take a look at our HTML file and see what happens when we actually execute the create payment function that is there. So if we look at our REST confirm file, you'll see that we have a create payment function, and that's doing the payment create call. And we can also see that it is attached on the component to the payment callback. So this is what we actually want to execute just to see if things are working correctly. So using Chrome console, how can we do that? So first off, I'm just going to try and execute the create payment function that we saw. It says cannot read property env of undefined. So if I click to see what happened there, basically it's just saying that it cannot read env because this.props is undefined. That's because we're just executing create payment function without actually being inside of the payment callback. So we need to find a way to execute that inside of the PayPal or the button component. So we can do that by simply switching our console scope into the button iframe. So now we're actually inside of the button iframe. So what would we actually call in order to execute that? I'll give you a second to think about it. So just like in our deep dive, we would execute I'm going to clear this quick. All right, so we would execute the window.xprops.payment function. And more than likely, this is going to return a promise because we saw that it was returning from the PayPal library. So I'm going to then it. I'm going to get the data, and I'm going to console.log it. I'm also going to do a catch just in case there's an error. And I'm just going to log if it hits an error. So now if I hit enter and execute this, it should force the iframe to execute window.xprops.payment, which is going to execute that on the parent page, and then it's just going to log the data. So it should actually log whatever is returned from our payment function. And we'll see the X component logs here. We can see that one of them was the REST API create, so we know that API call was made. And then we'll see the pay token. So that's actually pretty cool, and it's a good way that we could actually troubleshoot that payment function, because we know that it has to eventually resolve or return into some sort of a token. So if we're not seeing that when we execute this, then there's definitely something wrong in the actual way that they're getting their token. So now that we tested the payment callback, it's time to start with the integration. So let's locate part 1 section in the REST confirm.html, and then go ahead and pause this video and take a couple minutes to try and solve this part on your own. Follow the inline comments to complete. All right, if you haven't done so, please pause the video now, because I'm about ready to go through the answer. We go back to our training application on the REST confirm, find part 1, and it says complete the PayPal information, get PayPal information function. Basically by executing the function to return the payment details and return the promise. All right, so how do we do that? Well, in our last section, we went through and we saw what functions are available in the unauthorized actions object, and one of them was payment.get, and that's what we'll actually execute here. Return actions.payment.get, and then it says then call the pre-populate function with the data returned from that. All right, and then it says then call the pre-populate function with the data returned from the payment get. So I would just do a then pre-populate. All right, so that should be it for the part 1 of this exercise. You'll see the answer here. If you didn't get a chance to get that portion finished, go ahead and pause now and finish it up. Otherwise, we're moving on to part 2. All right, so for the second part, we're going to complete the unauthorized function. So let's locate part 2 section in the REST confirm. Let's just look at that real quick. So we have part 2, it says complete the unauthorized function, use PayPal all, and then execute both the get PayPal information and the setup execute functions. So we just actually created that function, but let's take a look at the setup execute and what that does real quick. So the setup execute is taking data and actions. It's creating an on-click event to execute on the submit button. So this is the confirmation button. And then once that's clicked, it's going to execute the payment. And then the execute payment is the same thing that we did in the first exercise. We're just calling the actions payment execute and then tossing the response into the DOM. All right, so go ahead and pause the video and take a few moments to complete part 2. All right, if you haven't done so, please pause the video now because I'm about ready to go through the answers for part 2. It says complete the unauthorized function. So here we're actually using paypal.promise.all from the very first section when we went over promises. We know that that function takes an array of promises and executes them simultaneously and then actually resolves when all the individual promises resolve. So we're going to say PayPal.promise.all, and remember that takes an array, and the array is just whatever is returned from the two functions that we have, which is get PayPal information and data actions and setup execute with data and actions. And then last but not least, we are actually returning the promise. All right, so that's going to execute both these functions and then resolve itself once they are both individually resolved. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save this now. And I'm going to refresh our page. All right, so I should be able to go through the payments flow now. All right, so you'll see that my form is now populated from the actions.payment.get call that we created. And then the second part of that is attaching that on-click event listener to this place order button. So when I click this guy, it's going to execute the payment for me and say that it's approved. So that's more of your typical PayPal flow there, using that sort of confirmation and pre-population of that final form. All right, so that is it for the second exercise, and here's the answer if you need to finish it. And then you'll see the PayPal button, the confirmation, and then when you click the place order, you will get the confirmation. All right, and that is it for this exercise. Our next exercises will start going over the classic Express checkout integration methods.